We have Ray Zhang on your right. You may know them as CFT Sock from Magic Online with a Pro Tour coverage, a combo for the sake of combo. And you have Daryl Arrows on your left here on Gruel Mice. And if you're an old head, you probably remember Daryl from the Star City Games tour days, as he was one of their sort of star players. So getting back into Magic, I know he's been someone who's been playing a lot of other games recently, and starting off 2-0 and has a tough round 3 ahead of them, as Ray is definitely one of the best players in the game right now, let alone in our tournament.
Yeah, and Ray is, they have decided to play the Esper Pixie deck. Now, we saw Robert Taylor and, a little bit of Pixie earlier today in both of our feature matches. And Ray is playing kind of like the less aggressive version. So there's 0 copies of Optimistic Scavenger and the full 4 stock up in the main deck. So it's almost like this deck has sort of been, it's been really interesting to see the kind of the evolution of the Pixie deck over the past couple of weeks. I don't know if the viewers at home know this, but CFT Stock actually won the Standard Showcase Challenge not too long ago with this sort of Esper Pixie deck with the 4 stock ups, 2 Dreams of Steel and Oil main as well. So it's almost more of a control deck that has kind of has the ability to have Hopeless plus Pixie in the matches where you need it. And then Daryl playing kind of like the more traditional Gruel Mice deck is going to be playing the Great Green for Innkeeper's Talent. Daryl also has a couple of Overprotects in the main deck, which is not something you always see in the Mice version. Usually see that in the ones that have Leyline, but don't always see that in the Mice decks.
Yeah, and that sort of deviation has big gains here in closed deck list, right? Ray,
Yes.
especially someone who's very well versed in the metagame, might not even have that card on their radar in game number 1 and might be backbreaking here for Daryl if that interaction lines up here. But yeah, as we see the Storm Chaser talent coming down, I wanted to comment on the Esper thing. I think a thing that players sort of like figured out, is that we were like, okay, Dimir Bounce is like the controlling bounce deck, and Esper Pixie is like the aggro one. And what Ray's done is really moved, Esper to be more like the Dimir deck with just more bounce targets with the Pixie, as we do see a higher claw here from Daryl.
Yeah, and the stock ups too, right? Because we mentioned how Pixie is a deck that has the capability of having very aggressive starts, right? Has a lot of 1-drops, can go Hopeless Nightmare into Bounce It and have that, drain over and over again. Has the, talent. Look at this start, for example. This is a very, very aggressive start. But also with 4 copies of stock up has, combining that with the talent and talent package now also has more of an ability to kind of play into the late game. So as you mentioned, it's kind of like threading the needle between the aggressive version and the more mid-range / controlling version, and kind of sort of turning that into like a hybrid version of sorts.
Yep, as we do see Daryl attacking here for one with the higher claw, gets the trigger for another point. And speaking of points, Devin, Ray has all pain lands right now. So Ray is already at 15. And this is one of the downside of the Esper deck sometimes is you draw one or too many pain lands, and the Gruel deck really capitalize on it. As it looks like Daryl dropped his hand there for a second. Back into things,
Whoops.
though. Yeah, oopsies.
Yeah, I mean, this is the exact matchup where you definitely don't want to be drawing 2 pain lands. I equate it to it's almost the equivalent of when you draw one of each fast lane. It's kind of like Tron, where it feels like you're just casting all of your spells without any issues, nothing whatsoever. But this is going to be brutal. Ray's already taken 3 damage. If they want to cast more spells, presumably, ideally you want to double spell this turn. That's 2 more damage minimum. It's going to be really hard to try and capitalize. But, with the 2 otters, if there is a double spell turn here, maybe you can just win the race, right? You have 2 otters. If you play 2 spells, that's an attack for 8 damage. Maybe just can sort of ignore Daryl's creatures and say, well, I don't care if I'm taking damage, as long as I'm winning the race, it doesn't matter.
Yep, and we're seeing a Hopeless Nightmare come down here. And I want to point out, this was in hand turn 1. So if you're at home, somebody who plays a lot of these Esper decks, you might learn something here from Ray, because Ray decided to go Hopeless Nightmare here on turn number 3. Spent the first couple turns building up the talents when they could have gone, Nightmare, Pixie, Nightmare in the first 2 turns, which I think is something we see a lot of players just default to. But Ray really valued getting that board presence first and rewarded heavily here with all these prowess triggers. And you see why Ray sequenced in such a way.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, in the dark, like if you knew you were playing against Domain, I think that's maybe the one matchup you would want to go Nightmare first. But against most of the other decks in the format, not going to say all, but against most, you kind of want to apply the pressure early, and those early otters are going to represent more than just the 2 damage that you get from the Nightmare when you recast it. So,
Mhm.
Ray kind of just acknowledging the fact that, if I need to race, this is going to allow me to do that more than casting the Nightmare on 1.
Yeah, and we're seeing Daryl's hands double Monstrous Rage Burst Lightning.
Yeah, so I guess Daryl thinking about, do we want to trade Heartfire and a Rage for an Otter token? That's a tough spot to be in when you're thinking about a defensive Rage with the red deck.
Yeah, I mean, it saves you some damage here and pushes a lot of damage on Ray,
Yeah, it
putting
does
them
deal
down to
5.
8. Yeah, but it is definitely not the way you want this to be going.
But I guess if you have the second Rage, you can go block Rage, put Ray to 8, and then on the next turn, attack with Claw, put Ray to 7, and then the Rage would make it, what, 4 minus 1 would be 3? That puts Ray to 4? It's close.
Yeah, and then you have a Burst Lightning, so if Ray ends up doing a double 1 mana turn again, that's pretty good. But yeah, it looks like Daryl's actually going to win. I wonder if Daryl's wanting to go face with this Burst Lightning and end of turn and actually, or maybe, clear the blocker. We'll have to see. But I'm curious. Yeah, Daryl goes upstairs to
Oh,
Ray down to 11. Daryl's trying to set up lethal here as a draw
okay.
for turn
So
and a quick
attack.
attack.
Yeah, that's going to put Ray to 10. So does double rage kill through a block here? So it's 1. So the hero would be 5, the claw would be 4. That's 9,
Yep.
I
And you're
believe.
seeing Ray sort of do some math here too. I think it's not lethal,
But
regardless of
if
what
you
Daryl drew.
the one appealing thing about putting Ray to 1 is that they have 2 pain lands in play. So if you're
Mhm.
Daryl, you just say, okay, rage, put you to 1. You now can't tap either of your pain lands for colored mana. Yeah, I love this play.
Yep. Yeah, I like this from Daryl too, setting up a line for lethal and just passing back. Now, Ray has a lot of power in play, but it only takes 1 spell, and we do have the 1 with the nowhere to run, and that's going to do it for Ray as Daryl falls to 0 in a lightning fast game there.
Whew.
Whew. That
Yeah,
was a
that was
crazy.
I mean, that game was really close. Just, making the 2 pain lands. Ray ended up taking what? I think 5 or 6 damage from their lands. So a
Mhm.
very, very close one.
Yeah, and it shows just too like how much this rule deck capitalizes on. I mean, Ray took basically the maximum amount of damage that they could have taken
Yeah.
from the. They used the mana every turn. They pained every turn except for the turn where they couldn't, and it was very impressive there still. And shows a lot of game this picture decks has. And let's check out our sideboard real quick here. We're gonna start with Dale Ayers. We have 2 Lithomantic Barrage, 3 Obstinate Bailoff, 3 Paw Patch Formation, 3 Questing Druid, 3 Sunspine Links, and a Torch the Tower. Devin, what do you like?
Yeah, there's a lot of ways that Daryl could go with this. Obstinate Bailoff is something that these players usually go gravitate towards against something like Hopeless Nightmare. But then there's kind of this weird dance where if you know they have Bailoff, maybe you sideboard out your Nightmares. So that could be some sort of little bit of give a game inside the game kind of thing. Questing Druid, if your resources are getting taxed, then Questing Druid is very good at allowing you to get more resources. But I mean, if you have a game like that we just had where Ray just has 3 otter tokens and is racing you, the Questing Druid's not good in those games. Sunspine Links is interesting because I believe there's only 1 basic land in Ray's deck list. So Links could, deal a ton of damage. And it's also something that you don't want to bounce with something like Nowhere This Town Ain't Big Enough.
Mhm.
And then Barrage as well. That could be something to clean up an early, like, Fear of Isolation or Otter token.
Definitely, and let's take a look at Ray's deck. And I was about to say, normally Sunspine Links is great, but Ray, maybe even thinking
Oh,
about it, actually has 5
5
basic
basics?
lands in their
Oh
deck.
boy.
Yeah, and I think it really shows too the way Ray views this deck. Right, we have a ton of islands, 2 of them, 3 swamps. Let's take a look at the sideboard before we go too in depth on that. I just wanted to shout out that normally I think that's true, and Daryl might even make that play, but
Yeah.
we might end up with a hand that has 2 or 3 basics. Regardless, there are 2 Destroy Evils, 1 Dream of Stealing Oil, 2 Duress, 2 Ghost Vacuum, 2 Grim Bauble, 2 Lorna of the Third Pass, 2 Pass Control, and 2 Preacher of the Schisms here for Ray. What do you like, Devin, and why?
So the Grim Baubles seem like they're slam dunks, being able to kill the early 1 drops, also a way to kill a Hardfire hero without taking additional damage, and is something good you want to bounce. Pest Control, there's a lot of 1 drops in the red deck. Those seem like pretty good. Not sure about the discard spells. There's a good number of targets in Daryl's deck for Duress, namely kind of the high value ones being Talent and Rage, but Daryl does have a lot of creatures, so that maybe not something you want to go towards. Preacher of the Schism is a fantastic blocker, but I don't know if you want to go towards that on the draw. Maybe that's something you would rather have on the play.
Mhm.
So really, the pest controls and the baubles for sure. And then past that, Ray has a couple of, different plans they can take depending on what role they kind of would like to do, whether it's play or draw. I think that definitely is going to change a lot of the sideboarding here.
Yeah, and I think one thing I want to mention too, along with all of that, is we talked about like the change or whatever, right? Ray's deck is definitely more controlling, but it still has that core aggressive element, right? I mean, Ray just killed there on turn 4,
Yeah.
which is really good for your deck that also can play these longer, grindier games. Really impressive, and why you see a lot of people play Esper Pixie, even though once again it did not have the performance I think a lot of players were expecting from the Pro Tour, and they're like, oh, none of the top 8 has to be a bad deck. Not really how Magic works. Sometimes these things don't convert this way. Sometimes your deck needs to adapt. Sometimes your opponent's decks adapt in a way that makes a lot of sense for the PT, not a lot of sense for an open field here. So these are things that happen. And speaking of things that also happen, Devin, we have more events coming up. So I want to quickly show our next one here in Chicagoland. That's going to be May 10th through the 11th. We're going to do a modern 10K showdown on Saturday. That will be post the ban and restricted announcement coming up at the end of this month. So keep an eye out for that. And then Sunday, 5K standard trial as well. Remember, if you win one of our showdown events, you'll be joining us at our champs event, end of the year, $30,000 prize pool, and an invite to the Pro Tour on the line. So you definitely don't want to miss out on your opportunity to play in that event or miss out on the coverage. Maybe you live too far away. We understand we got people from all over the world that watch, so make sure you click that follow button because we're going to stream all this to you as our players are presenting their decks to cut, which means it's time for more Magic, Devin.
Oh yeah. And one thing that we kind of touched on briefly during the sideboarding is, I had mentioned the Sunspine Lynxes, and you had brought up the fact that Ray has 5 basic lands in their deck. And, one thing that you kind of touched on towards the end there is Daryl might not know that, against most Pixie players, Sunspine Lynx, fantastic card. And to be honest with you, even with 5 basics, it's still pretty good. I mean, like if you look at the end of that game, Ray still had 3 in play, didn't draw a basic that game. But just those very subtle, one thing I love about like specifically Ray and the deck list that they make is they do a lot of these subtle changes, but like it's subtle changes that have such a cascading effect on a lot of different matchups. In an open deck, or excuse me, a closed deckless tournament like this, you gain a lot of edges in situations like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think people underestimate just the difference that 1 or 2 cards can make a lot of times, let alone
Yes.
sometimes these whole swath changes, right? And I think, if maybe you've heard the name CFT Sock or Ray Zhang before, and you don't really, a lot of times we mention them, but we don't really mention what they've done. So really quickly here, like the Aftermath Analyst deck is a deck that Ray put a lot of work into. Similarly, the Slogurk deck is another one where Ray put a lot of work into, really innovating and looking in spaces that lots of other players don't. And honestly, in my mind, it's so telling that Ray's playing Pixie. Now, this could be a situation where maybe Ray last second decided to play our event, was in town, and could only borrow the Pixie deck. But typically, Ray tries to, sort of break the mold on what other players are doing, right? Sort of avoids that sort of stuff. Now, we have seen Ray play this deck a lot on Magic Online, so they clearly like it. But it's really telling to me that this is what's happening here as we see the dreams of
Oh, this
Steel
is
and Oil.
funny. This is so funny because normally you see discard spell, right? Discard
Mhm.
spell doesn't want to take Obstinate Bailoff. Mason, that Dream to Steel and Oil exiles. So
Yeah.
if Ray does have a Hopeless Nightmare, they can just take the Obstinate Bailoff, gets exiled, doesn't get to put into play, and then they know that the Hopeless Nightmare is good to go.
Yeah, it's a super interesting spot here too, because also that play is super tempting, especially if you have the Nightmare in hand. But there's this Manifold Mouse that's your only other play currently because we're only on 2 lands. So yeah,
Yep.
you're seeing Ray sort of be like, I think thinking exactly what you were thinking there. Do I need to take this Baloth so that my Nightmare type cards are alive? Or maybe can I even kill the Screaming Assist? Now we have a nowhere to run in hand, so it's probably less of an issue. But we see
Yeah, and
Daryl
I
did pick up
actually
lands.
and I don't even think that Ray had the I don't even think Ray had the nightmare in their hand. So it's one of those situations where it's like, well, if I don't have the nightmare, I don't really care if you have the Bailoff, and if I draw the nightmare, then I just won't cast it.
Yeah, I also wonder, does Ray even have Nightmares on the draw?
True.
Right?
Yeah.
Like that's something that I know when I play this deck is something I will sometimes trim down on in matchups like this, where it's like, well, I don't have time to get on the board. And that, well, excuse me, I need to get on the board. I don't have time to not affect the board. Misspoke there. As Preacher of the Schism is going to attack in here for 2. And this is so telling when Ray is like, I'd like to start racing against your creature, you know. this extra life just means the preacher gets to make that 1-1 and puts Daryl in an unenviable position as Storm Teacher's talent comes down.
Yeah, I don't know if we can get the life totals updated. Obstinate Bailoff does not give your opponent 4 life. It would not be very good if it did that. So Daryl was the one who should be at 24. I guess now at 22 after taking 2 from the preacher. So maybe we'll see if we can get that updated for you folks at home. But yeah, this is 5 mana to kill a preacher is not the worst exchange. But do we have a bounce spell?
Yeah, yeah, and I you know what? A lot of structure from Daryl. Daryl knows it's over. These players are both very skilled. Daryl's played multiple pro tours as well. Doesn't have still the same pedigree as Ray has had, but knows that like, hey, I'm dead. I can't win this game. I'm gonna pack things up. So congratulations to Ray Zhang there. We're gonna see it take a second to talk here. We're gonna see if Ray wants to do an interview as we do like to do here on the NRG series. But if not, we do have a backup match, so don't worry. We've got more Magic coming to you either way. But yeah, Devin, I mean, what a game, and really shows too. I think when you see plays like that from high skill players, you really know like some games are over sooner than it maybe looks, and these early decisions have such cascading implications, right? Especially I think in this standard format.
Yeah, I mean if you look at Daryl's hand towards the end, it just Daryl didn't have anything left over and was just recognized when he was dead. And just yeah, I mean really just not a lot else to say. See, Ray played that game very well. The decision with the Dreams of Steel and Oil was able to take Daryl's really only 2 mana play, and then from there, Daryl was not really able to do all that much.
Yep. Yeah. And like you mentioned, it was very tempting. And I think also probably telling about the sideboarding too, right? Like thinking back on the hand or whatever, if Ray was debating on that, that does probably mean Ray kept in some amount of hopeless nightmares or maybe has some other discarding type effects that could have had the punish there. But also just in general, I really love and respect the like, okay, I have all this information. And we knew that Ray is sort of in a strong position at that point too, especially if the manifold goes. This is right? Like I need to double check this because tournaments are often won and lost on these little decisions like that, right? Or maybe Ray loses that game because of that small mistake. Then mulligans to 5, loses the next game, and suddenly Ray's 2-1 when they could have been 3-0. And I really just respect when tight players, especially when you had a lightning fast game 1 like that, it's like, okay, I've earned the extra 20 seconds, even though it might look quote unquote obvious, right? Especially if you knew you side out your nightmares. It's like, all right, I know what I'm supposed to do, but am I like, is this the game where I'm supposed to deviate? And taking that second, I think is something you see constantly from the highest level players, right? When they have these games in really great positions, they double check their work and
I was going to
something
make
to
sure.
learn from. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, and that first game was just won on razor thin margins, right?
Mm-hmm.
Daryl was able to get Ray all the way down to 1 life with 2 pain lands in play, had to dodge a spell, which Ray ultimately had. But I mean, that game was still super close. Ray took 5 damage from their lands that game. It was Daryl was really just 1 turn away, 1 spell away from winning the game, one what do you call it, the blizzard
Attack
trigger
step.
away from winning. Yeah,
Yeah.
1 attack step. So, both. I guess I wouldn't say both very close games. At least game 1 was.
Yeah.
But game 2, yeah, Daryl's hand was maybe just a little bit too slow.
Yeah. And that unfortunately sometimes does happen. Post board these Gruul decks sometimes become a little chunkier, right? And I
Yes.
wonder, like, did Daryl's opposite Bailoff, like what was taken out for that, right? If it's overprotect, that makes a lot of sense, not the end of the world. If it's like a Heartfire Hero or like a Swift Spear, maybe that's totally different. But speaking of what happened in that match, let's go down to Ray. Congratulations on being 3-0. How are you feeling today?
Well, I had to submit a very scuffed deck list because of card availability, but so far it's going okay.
Ray, is that why you have 5 basics in your deck?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, we actually thought it was like a strategic decision against Demolition Field or Sunspine Links, but okay, now that makes a little bit more sense now.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, you've been playing a lot of this Esper Pixie deck, right? Like on Magic Online, we've seen that, and I think a lot of players think of you as like an innovator, right? And someone that really tries to do different things and push metagames forward. What has you so in love with this Pixie deck? Because in my mind, I don't think of you as a Pixie player, but I'm starting to think of you as a Pixie player now. What's the deal?
So for the Pro Tour, I registered Pixie mostly because I didn't believe in my other options. But
Sure.
after the Pro Tour, Rini Autumn Burchett has been trying the card stock up in this deck, and I think it's like really nice because it allows you to like have instead of being aggro deck. You can like transform into this. You're now this like mid-range deck with like a lot of different and possible game plans, and you're just still playing like the most efficient cards. And so I don't know. I really like the deck now, I think.
That makes a lot
Yeah,
of
and that's
sense.
one thing that we were talking about in the booth is it really kind of changes even the post board games too, where you have a lot of these very high impact cards, and now you have stock up to kind of find those more high impact cards. You see those cyber cards more often. As far as the main deck decisions, you mentioned the 4 copies of stock up, 0 copies of optimistic scavenger, which is something that a lot of Pixie players are playing. And talk to me about the removal of scavenger from the deck.
Okay. I think you should probably play like 2 scavengers or something. But or, like I was planning to place 2 scavenger, but then I had to like fix my mana base, and now I have like less emphasis on white, and then like I also couldn't find a second scavenger that wasn't foil, so that was part of the reason. um,
Sure.
but like scavenger like post board against a lot of decks, like it's not that it's a very efficient card in terms of like putting power and toughness on the battlefield, but it can like introduce a lot of problems if you like draw at the wrong time, and or like uh it makes some hands a little weak, and then it's like weak to pest control or blast zone. Um, but I
Mhm.
still think like you should. Some people have been like cutting all of them now, but I still like playing a couple, but I don't think I want to play the full 4.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense to me. Well, Ray, thank you so much for taking a second to talk to us. We're going to get back to our backup feature matches, and we're going to let you go back to hanging out before you get some more Magic games to be played. A lot of rounds left, and we'll hopefully see you later in our day.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Well, it was great to talk to Ray there for a second and get their opinion on everything. And it makes a lot. I was curious about all the basics. I'm not going to lie. In my mind, I was like, this doesn't track, but Ray is very smart. And I know that, like, does the math or whatever. And I was like, I'm just going to trust, and, and we'll bring it up later. And then Ray being like, well, I wanted to
As a matter
game.
of
I had to
fact.
get my deck together. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, 3 Dark Slick Shores, maybe not the best, but
Yeah.
at least we figured it out. So I think we're ready to go to a time shifted match.
Let's do it. Let's head to our backup match.
Maybe.
Also really speaks to like how much more tight technical play matters than anything, right? But
Yes.
we're down in our Mexican matches. Joe on your left with Demir Control versus David on your right with Zur Domain.
All right.
This is going to be a wild one, Devin.
Yes, it is. So, Demir Control, we have it labeled as Control. This is actually the kind of Demons version. So, Joey is playing 3 copies of Jace the Perfected Mind and 2 Doomsday Excruciator. That, my friends, is what we call a combo. So, you play the Doomsday, you get them to 5 cards in library, and then play the Jace, mill them out. You also have Restless Reef, which can mill them out. Not fully from, Doomsday is 6, right? 6. Okay. So yeah,
Yes.
Doomsday is 6. So the math doesn't quite work on Restless Reef because you put them to 6, they draw to 5, then the Reef mills for 4. But it still can, do the job and close out the game. And then for David's side, kind of the more traditional domain type of stuff. We got some overlords, we got some Zers, we got some Bezos, we got some bindings and some beanstalks. So kind of the just business as usual here for David. But this has to be a fantastic matchup for Joey, right? Just not only having the combo, which is very hard for domain to interact with, also just Jace by itself is quite good against domain.
Yeah, it's like a card a lot of players sideboard for these like sort of mirrors, right? And getting to game 1, it's huge. Now, the duress misses, hits no cards. That's
Awkward.
that's going to help, advantage bar swings a little David's direction, but
Yeah.
it's definitely not the end of the world too, because really what Joe wanted is no up the beanstalk on 2, right?
Mhm.
That sort of thing of where David kind of gets to perfectly curve out and overwhelm you is the problem. And while Joey rather take it than, hopefully dodge it, it does sort of clear the way for that as we're seeing some land go from these players. And we're going to see a lot of that. It looks like Joe's actually going to slam down this stock up.
Yeah. Now, as far as, you see the deck list labeled Demir Control. So you see the word control, and you might associate that with a lot of counter spells. Looking at Joey's main deck, there's no counter spells. It's all kill spells. There's, discard spells in the form of duress, a couple of sweepers, and then anoint, cut down, go for the throat, shield Roots Edict. So not a single counter spell in the main deck. So doesn't really mind too much about tapping out, but the stock up is really good for this Dimir control / demons deck because it sets up the combo, right? Whatever half you're missing of Doomsday or Jace, it can find that other half. So fantastic card for a deck like this.
I think the way I really think about this deck is like a tap out control deck, right?
Yes.
Like
Yep.
it's not as much about holding up mana. And like you mentioned there, like maybe the best analog is sort of Pioneer Inverter, where we're trying to set that thing up to win the game, right? And so stock up sort of being your dig through time replacement is pretty huge, as we are going to see David slam down this Overlord of the Hauntwoods.
Mason, you mentioned Dimir Inverter, and now I can't stop thinking about what if Inverter was unbanned in Pioneer and you got to play stock up in that deck? Like,
listen,
Anyways.
I would love for Inverter to be unbanned, but
I still have 40 copies. So if that gets unbanned, I'm just saying.
It's one of my favorite decks I've ever played. Maybe it's because it's also one of the best decks I've ever played. Hard to know. As we do see David here playing the 5th land, has Zur in hand. Gonna play that Zur and attempt to activate the Overlord and just smack in. Yeah. Joe, I think, saying, hey, I'm going to respond to the activation. It's just a cut down. And then we're going to Shield Roots Edict down that Overlord. And this is what David needs. We need pressure if we're going to win and, prevent Joe having time to get the demon combo. But
right. So even no counter spells, Joey is still able to cleanly answer and could play a Jace on an empty board here. I saw a Jace in Joey's hand. At least we're maybe thinking about it. Ooh, the tome, the book. We're going to
pull
open
up
up
the Maze Mind Tome. Zoomers, I've never seen this card before. A Foundation All-Star. Reckoner Bankbuster version 1, as they call it.
Yeah. This is the prototype, right?
Not to be confused with the prototype mechanic as Overlord of the Mistforce comes down.
But yeah, you could pay 2, tap, put a counter on it, draw a card. You can tap, put a counter on it, descry 1, and when it has 4 counters, you exile it and gain 4 life. So basically, it's if you think about it, it's 10 mana, draw 4, which.
It's nice. I mean, and gain some life is pretty huge. Also, a lot of times you end up just scrying. I found with this card, like 2 or 3 times, just like, okay, I just want to make sure I make all my land drops and have the resources that I played in the early game. And, it becomes like 4 mana, draw 1, scry 3, gain 4. And in the right matchups, that's really good. As we are going to see Joey make another land drop into a Jace.
Yeah, in a matchup like Mice, for example, where you're looking for very specific sweepers, the scry, you don't have enough mana to activate the tome to draw cards. Being able to scry off of that and then eventually gain 4 life is pretty huge. Jace is kind of the card here. Now, you see, Joey tapped out. There is an Overlord hanging out. So if David has a second copy of Zur, this is going to be a brutal turn here for Joey because the Overlord can cleanly answer the Jace. So we'll have to see if David does have a second Zur.
Yep. We're going to see Day of Judgment, Temporary Lockdown, and land hit the graveyard for David. 3 cards he didn't want. Sometimes the mill giveth, sometimes the mill taketh.
I saw it, Mason. I believe there is a second Zur in David's hand.
I think so too, and that is going to be a really big issue.
Okay.
It looks like
how about a third Zur?
Yeah, are we just actually maybe making it seem like we needed the Zur? I guess it's possible.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes. Oh, okay.
Okay, I like this.
Do we not have a Zur?
No, I think we do. So we're getting the Overlord, and I think the idea here is my Moths kill the Jace, right? I'll make land drop this turn, and then next turn I can
twice.
Yeah, I can do it twice and present lethal. And then if Joey wants to deadly cover up, which he's going to need if he's going to win, he's going to need something like that. I get to dodge that, right? So I think that's the idea behind David's play here is basically I'm going to try and set up to play, this 2 turns you're dead game and force you to have a lot of it if you're going to beat me over this next turn cycle. Because deadly cover up's the cleanest way to clean things up here, and it's 5 mana.
Yeah, and the Moths went upstairs. If you're in Joey's seat and you're looking at the Moths attacking you instead of the Jace, you got to be like, what?
Yeah.
I'm in danger.
And along that same line, too, like if Pollen isn't getting Zur, you have to think that David either has Zur or thinks David has lethal, right? Because obviously Zur represents 2 Moths as well. So clearly something's up here. As Joey unfortunately does not have the Doomsday Executioner to execute the combo before that draw, but now we do.
Hey, drew it off of the Jace. A little too late though.
Yeah,
because if you tap out for Doomsday, you're surely just dead on board to the Yeah, well, okay, so untap land, if you Doomsday block one of the overlords, that would be
It'd
what,
be 1 over.
15? Right? Yeah, 1 over.
Oh, but the Jace. Oh no, the Jace already minus. Excuse me. Pardon me.
Yeah, Jace minus.
Yeah, tough spot to be here. As
So you have to have a sweeper, but then even if you have a sweeper, untap land Zur is still exactly 14.
yeah, and Jerry might just have to play around and hope that David, despite being tuna, maybe made a misstep here, just doesn't have it. It's very obvious something's going on in hand, right? I mean, David could have, like we said, got the Zur. Joey's played a lot of events here.
Yeah, and I
Yeah,
wonder if you're in Joey's side of things, do you just have to assume that David has the Zur if he got the Overlord last turn? You probably do.
I think you have to, but I think we actually hit a point where we can't beat that card. So
Sure.
now we have to hope our opponent either doesn't have the land, right? They could be slow rolling us on the land, but we have to hope they don't have it, or they just made a mistake, right? And I think that is sort of your out to victory at this point is sort of, okay, my opponent's either, ideally maybe messed up or overthought things a little bit, or they just don't have the mana, and I have to win that way because we're not going to win through normal means. And I don't think we drew a land.
No
We drew
untap
another
land.
Zur.
Yep, no untap land. So
Oh
you can go
no.
Zur, animate one Overlord, but the Doomsday can block the one Overlord. You take 8, go to 6, and the second Jace would just kill David.
Yeah, and we're seeing the Zur come down. David here. It's going to animate one of the Overlords, but this isn't lethal, like you said.
Yeah, David can, attack the Jace, but that doesn't matter because we know that Joey has a second Jace in hand.
Yep.
And yeah, this should be all she wrote. So that was a really close. David had the opportunity to play the Zur last turn, decided to, understandably so, hold the Zur until the next turn to try and one shot to play around the sorcery speed kill spells and sweepers. But yeah, really, Joey just was able to yeah, that was a really close one.
Yeah, that was a super close game there. And I mean, I think that's just a situation where it makes sense from both sides, and we sort of played to our outs to win. So we're going to have to see what happens in game number 2 as we are running low on time and around. So we're going to skip sideboarding once again this round for our time shifted feature match and just head into game number 2 here and get you as much of this match as we can. As the players are moving at 1.5 speed as well. That's the magic we have.
Yeah, I'm just going to highlight real quick. David's sideboard's got 3 negates, and that is most of what we're doing here as far as the domain thing. And then Joey has some overlords and a couple of negates of his own that maybe he can go towards, different alternate plans. But I mean, to be honest with you, Joey's plan A is pretty good in this matchup. It's really hard for David to interact with the combo of Doomsday plus Jace because even if you have Leyline Binding or some other kill spell, the Doomsday is still going to get the trigger and the Jace is still going to mill. So the only way for David to stop that is those 2 copies of negates. So there's not really a ton here for David in terms of defense against that.
Yep, as we are seeing some land go here from David, and then Overlord of the Mistmores comes down. Joey doing some scrying, trying to find lands here with this Maze Mind Tome. We talked about it a little in game 1 about how, surprisingly powerful this card is. As it helped Joey get that land we needed at the Dark Slick Shores. And it's time for a little combat. The Moths are heading in.
Beatdowns. Ooh, cut down stayed in. Okay, I guess Zur. That does make sense.
Yeah, I think it's probably just your cheapest answer to that. And Caretaker's Talent here from David. You see, even Joey mentioned, not a card you see a ton of in the domain decks, but David is playing it here this weekend as a way to get a couple more cards. As Joey's like, well, I don't know. I'm going to negate that. I'm tight on mana.
Yeah, that is a one of in David's deck list. It looks like David decided to play that as the kind of a 5th copy of Up the Beanstalk, which sort of makes sense. You have a bunch of ways to make tokens between both Overlords, green and white, make tokens off of that, and Sunfall makes tokens. So you have some ways to make tokens to do that.
Yep. And it looks like we're
Joey potentially missing a land here.
Joey, looks like we're scrying with the Maze
We're
Mind
scrying
Tome.
upkeep. Yeah, I think we're scrying upkeep as we're looking for lands. He did find one. And I believe the leftovers, stock up. Couldn't quite get a good look of what we have past that.
I think it's stock up land, Jace, and miscellaneous cards. So
The 5 lands off the stock up.
I think it's close to it if it isn't.
I think it's 5.
Yeah, I mean, you have the creature land and the Verge. Those aren't the end of the world. You also have the swamp that you could take so that you turn your other Verge online. I mean, at this point, if we're missing land drops, getting a couple lands here isn't the end of the world. It looks like Joey is holding up Cut Down here for potentially the Moth or Zur.
Yeah, to be honest with you, even if the stock up was 3 spells and 2 lands, Joey still might have just taken 2 lands anyways because he's kind of light on mana. Does have to
Mhm.
get to 6 to be able to cast that Doomsday Excruciator.
Mhm.
But yeah, we not a lot of pressure here for David, although land Zur could represent a good amount of pressure. And with Joey only having 1 mana up, doesn't really have a way to stop the Zur.
Yeah.
Curious as to what the cavern is naming. Whether it's I don't know if we probably don't have the way to confirm that in terms of the time shifted match, but I don't think I see black mana. So if it's not naming human or wizard, probably can't cast the Zur this turn.
I can't remember for
Okay,
sure.
well,
Okay, it looks like it was naming it. I was gonna say I know we casted the Overlord, but we also had double white, so it was really a matter of if David
right.
wanted to play around removal. And looks like Joey was maybe bluffing that cut down.
Yeah, I think if you're in Joey's seat, even if you have the cut down, you probably don't like if your hand is cut down plus sweeper, you probably don't even use the cut down there because you're going to
Mhm.
sweep next turn anyways, and the life just doesn't matter for David. And look at that. We have exactly enough to get rid of the Zers, and that's going to be huge. Getting to take the rest of the Zers out of David's deck list is going to mean that Joey does not have to worry about that the rest of the game. And
Mhm.
that's probably David's best way to kind of put a bunch of pressure into play and maybe kill the turn that Joey decides to tap out for a Doomsday. So not having to worry about those Zers is it's going to make David's life a lot harder.
Yep. As we see these Zers, I think we just have 3. Looks like we have one of the completed Planeswalkers. I think that was the Emperor.
I
But
think it was the Eternal Wanderer, I believe.
yes, excuse me. I was calling them by their name, not their card name. That's on me. I believe that's the lore. They are the Wanderers. We call them, but their name is like the Emperor, where maybe like the people aren't supposed to know her name. It's like a thing on Kamigawa. Very interesting.
I'm glad you know the lore because that is an area of expertise that I am not familiar with.
I surprisingly know a lot about the magic lore.
Okay,
It's
good.
come in handy a few times,
That's
as
why
we
we
see
keep you
Overlord and
honestly.
Resource. Yeah. Hey, if I didn't know about the lore, you wouldn't have Flage. So you know what? You're
That is
welcome.
true. That is true.
As we see, Jace is in hand for Joey, which means if we had the demon here, it'd be huge. But looks like
Indeed.
if we do have it, we're at least taking a think. And I think we might just be passing the turn back. Yeah, we're going to hold up our mana here. Go for
I
the
think it
throat
might have
in hand.
been 2 Jaces. Can't remember.
Yeah,
I
looks like
thought at
Joey's
least one.
going to pop the Maze Mind Tome, draw a card now. And that's going to undo the moth damage. So we sort of get this one for free if we want it. But we're going to cut down one of these moths. So we're going to be up 2 on the exchange.
Joe's going to go to 11. And then see what the follow up here. It's another 4 mana Overlord impending. Yeah, and you see without the Zur, it's just really hard for David to put a whole bunch of pressure. These 2-1s, they are meaningful pressure, right? They're not 0 for sure, but it's definitely not nearly as good as having a 7/7 that creates 2 more of those every turn. So it is a lot harder for David to kill without the Zur.
Yeah, and you see Joey decide to keep a card on top. I have to imagine it's either a sweeper or the executioner. As it looks like, yeah, we're playing Jace. That might be a really clear sign that the Doomsdayer is coming. So it looks like we're going to tick up on Jace, turn one of these moths offline.
Yeah, so then 4 damage coming across. The Jace can get hit for 4. That puts it to 2. But then if Joey has the Doomsday, Jace being a 2 is still lethal because that's 6 cards. The Doomsday puts you to 6.
Yeah,
And worth noting, David's counter spells in the sideboard are only negate. So now that the Jace is in play, the Doomsday cannot be interacted with in any meaningful way. I guess technically it can. You can binding the Jace in response to the Doomsday.
yeah, I would say I think we even have the binding in hand. So
Oh,
it's really a
okay.
matter. Okay, Joey had Overlord of the Flood Pits. Ah, we were just okay. Maybe trying to get us to fight over the Jace. You do need to ask the question now of cards in deck, as we have 2 Jaces.
So what's that? 33 right now?
I think it looks about right. Yeah.
Okay, can we do a quick count? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 4 exile. That's 10, 12, 15 plus cards in hand. So it looks like maybe about 40-ish,
Yeah.
give or take.
That's close, but not enough. We're going to just take a redraw here with our Jace. Mill David for 3.
Yeah, these domain decks tend to have a lot more cards in deck when they don't draw 7 extra cards off up the beanstalk.
Yeah. We do think of it as something that sort of, overwhelms the cards, not always. And it looks like the Executioner was picked up, but we're going to start with this Flood Pit. Just
Interesting.
going to
Okay.
take some cards. Yeah. A little surprised to not see the Doomsday, but it looks like Joey's maybe trying to set up for that card.
Do we have it in hand? I couldn't quite get a good look at Joey's hand. He does. Okay.
Yeah, we picked it up off the Jace activation again.
So
Another situation of that.
I wonder if maybe he's waiting for a turn where he can go Doomsday with Negate up in case there's a binding. And yeah, so binding's going to take care of the Jace. And now without the Jace in play, you don't really have a way to kill with the Doomsday. You're taking 6 damage going to 1. Maybe there's a kill spell here that can prevent that. But I mean, the Doomsday only blocks one of these flyers. If you take 6 and go to 1, you need at least a sweeper here.
Yeah. And now
Overlord's coming into play too.
All right. So, I mean, Joey, go for the third of the Overlord. Shows he doesn't have a Wrath, but he drew one. But there is a negating hand for David. And yeah, I mean, we wanted to get a card off the Jace, but I think it ended up biting us a little bit here.
Presumably, if Joey had a negate, he would have fought over the Leyline binding.
Yeah, presumably. Which means Joey's probably in pretty big trouble here. We'll have to see. As it looks like we are tapping 5 mana. I believe that is.
There's the sweeper. But yeah, this negate should just clear it up. Because I don't think there was a way for Joey to fight over this.
I don't think so either. And these 3 buys that all represent lethal is a bit of an issue.
Now, we've already gone through, what, I think at least 2 cut downs. Yeah, that's going to be it.
Yeah, so that's going to get us a game number 3 here between Joey and David. That was a tight one there. It felt like something that kind of Joey had most of the tools to go the distance, but just couldn't quite get there. And that's what happens sometimes. So we're going to go on to our game number 3. But as a small little warning, there was a little bit of a technical glitch. So we lost the first 2 turns. Don't worry, we still have the rest of the game. Probably won't be the end of the world in this matchup. Luckily, it's not something like, Ray versus Daryl in the first part of this round. So we're going to head on down to our feature match area and get you game number 3 here of our backup match in round number 3.
Yeah, this is one of those matchups where, as you see, nothing happened in the first 2 turns anyways, so we're kind of fine here. You missed a couple of land drops, to be fair. But yeah, it looks like we came just in time for Joey playing the Overlord on turn 3. Very interesting to see how that game played out, where it's like, David had that one big turn where it was able to go for Zur. Joey, was able to follow up with the cover up to take care of the Zers, but then just the back-to-back Overlords after that, Joey, had the tools to be able to go for the combo, waited a turn to try and set up for the, the combo with negate backup, presumably, but David was able to, almost feels like David stole that one, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it really does feel that way.
All right, Beza, which I believe is for nothing. Just 4 mana 4/5. I don't even think we got the card off of it. So 4 mana 4/5. Mason, what is the most iconic 4 mana 4/5 vanilla that we can use for comparison? You know how people say Gray Ogre and Goblin Piker and all that stuff?
I don't
Find me a 4 mana 4/5.
I'll do some research between rounds. I don't know off the top of my head, but I do know this Jace is coming down and milling David for 2 Overlords and a land and giving Joey that land drop. Let's see.
I can't think of any. I was going to say Leatherback Baloth, but that's a 3 mana 4/5.
That's the
I don't
3
think
4
that counts.
Oh yeah, that does not count. Got to match it up equally here, but we'll get our greatest minds on it later.
We'll find something.
Siege Rhino? Yes, Siege Rhino. It's like a vanilla sometimes, am I right? As the Mistmores comes down, these Moths are back at it.
Yeah, and this is kind of an interesting dynamic where, the Jace... Oh, well, never mind. We're dead.
Yeah.
There is no dynamic. I lied.
As Doomsday Executioner comes down, that's going to remove all but 6 cards in the deck here, and then we're going to see Joey target David with a mill for 6 cards thanks to the Jace going down. Yeah, I mean, David accidentally showed him
we
cards,
revealed
but
them.
at the end of the day, it really doesn't
gonna mill
matter.
it
Yeah,
anyways,
I
that's
think
fine.
David
Yeah.
thought that we were minusing on the mill 3 draw a card mode and forgot that Jace does the mill X times 3 mode. So that's going to do it here for Joey. He's going to win game number 3 here versus David in the blue-black control versus Zer matchup. Pretty impressive stuff there from that blue-black deck. I think if it hits the right matchups, it's really powerful like that one. We'll have to see if Joey can keep it up. But speaking of keeping it up, Devin, we've got more Magic to show you. So we're going to take a quick break and set up our feature matches for round number 4, and we'll be right back. See you soon.